All right. So today I'm going to be teaching you how to have better anime conversations because that is a thing that is, in my estimation, incredibly necessary. I don't know about you. The reason this exists is because I would try to talk to people about stuff I liked and they would be like, cool, I haven't seen it. And then you just stop talking because, like, oh, I guess you have to have seen all the same things in order to bond over the content, right? Which it struck me as that not being correct. So the idea here was, whoa, the idea here was to go through my slides way too quickly. The idea here was to create a better space of conversation and a style of communication that could be useful for you outside of these spaces as well. You're all here, you all like the same stuff roughly anyway, so you might as well teach you something here. But also this can be a useful everyday life skill where you're talking across purposes, because I mean, I don't know, every setting that I exist in, someone's just like, let me tell you about this thing excitedly, and you're like, I know some of those words. So you need to work with it a little bit, right? So some of you will have seen a lot of this information before. So yeah, I have a PhD in counseling psychology from Texas Women's University in Denton, Texas. Yeah. I work at a college counseling center currently at Johns Hopkins University. I also have a private practice where I see clients and do a bunch of other stuff as well, do groups. One of my claims to fame around my professional life is I make people play Dungeons and Dragons about their feelings. So we do group therapy involving Dungeons and Dragons. So, you know, get out there and, I don't know, pretend to be an elf that has feelings about stuff instead of you that has feelings about stuff, right? So my dissertation was on hikikomori, which is social isolation. I've also done a lot of work with meditation and mindfulness and things like that, teaching people how to get in touch with better coping skills. And also the method you're going to see today was actually published last year in the Phoenix papers. So if you're interested in seeing kind of the full-fledged write-up for it, it's out there. You can go look at it right now. Also, anime psychology is a big thing. So I've got a chapter in a book coming up that's about My Hero Academia and how it relates to psychological concepts. So that kind of content is out there for you if you are looking for it. So, and again, my favorite series include all of those things. You can't judge me. This is my panel. So some of the things you see here are going to make another appearance and you're going to be like, oh, that makes sense. And yeah, because again, this is my panel. So I can be like, this is the example and this is what we're going to talk about, right? So here's the thing. One of my favorite anime is Evangelion. Anyone? Yeah? Yeah? Yes. Good. Okay. So the thing with Evangelion is there's like 50% of people who are just like about it. There's 50% of people that are like, wow, that's garbage, which is fair enough. You know, the amount of times I had to talk to a very close friend of mine about like, Shinji's the worst. Everyone hates him. And I'm like, yes, that's the point. He's a 14-year-old boy. No one likes 14-year-old boys, not even 14-year-old boys, right? If you were 14 or 15 or 16 and your absent father abused you and said, okay, jump in a robot and save the world, son, you would fail too. That's the point. That's why it's so bad, right? But this was the thing of like having to talk to people about all the stuff that I liked, kind of put it in perspective for me of like, how do you actually successfully have these conversations, right? Because even when talking with people that liked the same stuff I did, I still wasn't finding myself very successful in these communications, which, you know, fair enough. Also, my postulation here is that if you can talk deeply about something, that's going to increase your affection for that thing, right? If you're just only being able to hit the surface level high points when you're talking about stuff, that's maybe less fun. If you're able to have like a really animated, in-depth conversation, maybe that goes somewhere. And the skill that you're going to learn today is actually really useful in the psychological profession. And it's something that you kind of never use again once you get through your training, which is a shame because it's a cool idea. So I'm going to teach you all to do it. And, you know, we're bringing it back, right? The other thing is like when you're sharing this kind of stuff, you're going to spark off on new ideas. You're going to come up with stuff that you hadn't thought about before. Which is important because if you only think the same things that you normally think about stuff, about the things that you enjoy, eventually that's going to get old, right? Or eventually you're going to get stuck. And yeah, again, I like to argue a lot. So that's where we end up with here, right? So here's the thing. Here is a definition that I took word for word from a textbook about case conceptualization in a psychological perspective. If you're trying to read that right now, kudos to you. I'm not going to bother. That's like 3 sentences. Okay. This is what we're working with. This is how they try to teach you to do this, which I'm all here for, like academic rigor and like say the things you need to say in a scientific way. But I have a whole PhD, and some of that for me is just like, but why? Why would you do that to me? Why would you do that to anyone trying to read your content, right? And I will cop to, like, I picked the longest, most dense definition for the purposes of argument here, but they're all pretty rough. That's what they say it is. I'm going to break it down for you in a much easier way. A case conceptualization is simply a report. It is a report based on information gathered. You organize it, you do assessments and things, and you provide an explanation for behavior of a person that you're working with. In my context, I'm a therapist, so I would tell you about what this person is like when they're in my office when we're talking about their clinical concerns, right? Generally speaking here, when you're looking at this, therapists or counselors will use emotional information, things that people outright tell you, like I'm sad is information that they have directly stated to you, right? Nonverbal information. Do they appear anxious? Do they appear happy? Do they appear sad? Are they doing certain activities, right? And behavioral information. They're like, I went out and did, 2 tons of drugs last weekend. That's behavioral information. It's also concerning, but whatever, you do you. But the idea here is that it helps develop a picture of what the person you're working with is up to, what they're doing, what their concerns look like, what they do. And the idea here is that it gives you this picture, and this picture is meant to lead to collaboration, because once you know what's going on for this person, then you can start to help them do different things or heal or change or whatever it is you're trying to do. In my part of the woods, this is collaboration on goals as well. So if they tell you everything that's going on and they say, here's what I want to be different, that's what you're looking for generally. Yeah. It would not bother me. I don't know if the powers that be have an issue with that, but yes, the Zoom portion of it is. So it will be on YouTube if you ever want to look back on it in the next little bit. Yep. All right. So I talked a lot at you about that thing, and I will break it down a little bit further as well. So basically, we're asking 3 questions here. How does the person understand the client that they're working with, right? I promise you, we'll get to the anime in a minute. Don't worry about it. The second piece, what patterns of thinking, actions, feelings, whatever you want to call it, what are the needs to be addressed? Because in a clinical setting, if you don't know what needs to be addressed, you're screwed, because you're like, I don't know, there's probably no problems. What are you even doing, right? And the third piece is, how does theory inform your goals? So in my neck of the woods here, everybody has a slightly different orientation to the world of psychology. So there are people that follow one theory very strongly, and so they will view everything through the lens of that theory. Does that make sense? So if, like, I very strongly believe that everything in life is based on our emotions, everything I see in front of me will be related to emotions, right? Some people are pure cognitive. They only think of thoughts. Everything is thoughts. So everything that you're seeing wrong for this person has to be thought-based, right? That's the idea here. So here's how this is going to be useful for us today. We're going to make this even easier. What are you seeing? So the cool part about this method is you don't have to have seen all the same things as anybody here. I can talk to you about any theory, any scene, any anime, any manga, anything you want, as long as you can describe it to me appropriately. So that's what you got to do here. What are we seeing? You're going to tell me that. Or if I'm doing the example, I will tell you what you see. We're going to talk about characters particularly today, but you can use this for anything. But when we talk about characters, the events of what happens to them. We'll get into how that will look here, but that's the first piece. Second piece, how do we understand this information? So the raw blow by blow, what happened to that person might be up for interpretation. Your understanding of it might be different from mine. So when you're talking about this with another person, you add how you understand this information, right? Because how I understand it and how you understand it might be different, which makes a really interesting opening for a conversation, right? Because you can tell me why you think that way. I can tell you why I think this way. And we go around and around until I don't know whatever your goal is, right? And the third piece here is what can actually be done with any of this information. Sometimes this can be related to like clinical things, for example, But here, this can be related to a story. Like, what would be a good story for this character? What would be a good ending if the series hasn't ended? If a series has ended and you're salty about it, what would have been a better ending, right? You get some opportunities here. So these are the 3 questions. I'll have them back up as we get to it, but this is what we're asking you to do. I will show you an example of this, and then we'll just take over and we'll see what we end up talking about, within acceptable parameters, right? So here's the thing. I'm going to give you an example from something that I'm quite sure all of you are at least vaguely aware of, right? You've all kind of seen My Hero Academia, right? It's incredibly popular. It's good. I read the new chapters every time they come out. It's a problem. Yeah. Okay. So Bakugo from My Hero Academia. I'll tell you some things that happen or that he does or that he engages in. He's a bully. I don't know if you like that, but that's true. He is a bully, at least as a young person. He's kind of a dick when he gets older too, but that's, a whole different thing. But he's a bully. He engages in bullying, which is something that tells us about his character, right? Because certain kinds of people engage in certain kinds of behaviors. I'm not saying that defines him exclusively as a person, but he's aggressive towards other people. He denigrates other people. He beats them down for not complying with the rules that he perceives society to have. That's a whole thing, right? And he also engages in explosive fits of anger. Now, great, his whole power is that he blows stuff up, which is like kind of a character, oh yeah, his character and personality, But he blows stuff up, but he's very angry. He flies off the handle at any given moment and about any given topic. Someone just says something he doesn't like and he just freaks out, right? That's interesting. I would argue that he's borderline abusive to other people, especially when he's put in settings where he probably shouldn't be. So like, hey, you're on a team, work together. And he's like, I hate all of you. You're the worst. I'll do it myself. Is not a great team player behavior, right? And I've said all this. I actually like the character. I just, if this is your character and you're like, yes, he's the best, like, just critical examination, right? Like, it's cool if you like. But you also see some interesting dichotomy with this character, right? Because he is very heroic. He saves the day. He puts himself on the line to help other people. He isn't necessarily always nice to those people, but does that matter is an interesting question, right? He clearly idolizes some of the correct people in life. He maybe has a hard time relating to that, but he clearly is in this in some ways for the right reasons. And he has, sort of this interesting gift that he's been given, and he's incredibly powerful. And sometimes the mark of a person is what they do with an amount of power that they have, right? And so he gets better over the course of the series as well, right? If you stick in it long enough, he actually gets nicer. He actually starts to learn that, like, yeah, all the other people around you are doing better than you because they are cooperating, because they are nicer, because they are going along with each other, right? And he gets mentorship from important characters like All Might, for example, who's just like, hey, here's what it is. I used to be the best, the most powerful, and here's what some of that is like. And mentorship is important, especially for young men, right? Because there's a lot of impulses and not a lot of impulse control. And so you get some of that too. So here's what I would say. How do you understand this information? One thing I would point out is that Bakugo is incredibly privileged from a societal perspective. His quirk is really good and really powerful. In a society that values power and utility of your abilities, he's top tier. He's been told his entire life that he is really good just for the virtue of he's good at this. He can blow stuff up with his sweat, ? Yeah. Again, it's a weird society. We're working with it. But he's been told that he is the top dog his entire life, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But if you live your whole life on third base thinking you hit a triple, you develop a certain attitude towards life. He shows that attitude in spades, right? This kid doesn't even have a quirk. You suck compared to society. So I can bully you because you are not as good as me, right? That's not explicitly stated, but that's one way to think about it. His family is also kind of interesting, right? If anyone's ever seen the introduction of his family, his dad's kind of like this like wussy salary man. He just has like a normal straight job and like doesn't really do anything. And his mom is like really vivacious and like vibrant and like maybe aggressive depending on how you read it, but she's very like intensely connected and like I love him intensely and like, tries to set him on the right path in a lot of ways, in ways that maybe aren't useful. Also, he exhibits what I would call in a therapeutic sense a fragile ego strength, which means that like the second his worldview gets punched in the face, he starts to freak out and lose it, which is kind of what you don't want in a person, right? What you want is a little bit of like toughness in this. He kind of doesn't really have that toughness in some ways. So he gets rattled pretty easily. He gets thrown off, he makes bad decisions, and like, don't we all, right? But in this case, it's a little harder because he can make things explode, which, yeah, not great. The other thing I would point out here is just systemic toxicity. The system, the world that is the My Hero Academia world is kind of messed up at times. It puts people in weird situations, and especially if you are this person, if you're very volatile and you're having a hard time with life, you might have a bad time, right? So here's the thing. Now, knowing all of this information, what are we going to do with this? What do you want to see happen for this character? Well, I would say you could teach him a different way of being, right? Which is actually what happens throughout the course of the show, right? Or the series. That he learns, hey, you cannot be a dick to people, and it actually works. Good things happen. In fact, the people who are the most powerful in the My Hero Academia universe, generally, are people that work well with others, people that cooperate, people who go through training, people who take their lives very seriously. Now, he does have some not great mentorship there, where it's like, okay, that guy's not really doing the right thing, but he gets largely good mentorship, and he gets to see other people grow around him because he was the most powerful person without really trying for a long time. Now that everybody's trying, and now that everybody's really powerful, now you have to really put the work in. And if you put the work in, things happen, right? For him, that goes in confronting issues, right? If people are telling you consistently that you are interpersonally difficult to work with, either everybody is wrong or you are wrong, right? And so if you start to confront those things, maybe you'll get somewhere. Also, instilling values is important, right? If power is the only thing that is worthwhile and you have it, then that's great, right? Might makes right, except it doesn't, right? So teaching him other things that are valuable, cooperation, heroism, sacrifice, whatever it is, whatever your Saturday morning anime like fix of like power of friendship is, whatever you want to teach here is useful. And also emphasizing connection, right? My Hero Academia as a series, largely in a psychological sense, has a lot of connection in it, right? Deku's whole thing is that he is connected to other people, he cares, he sacrifices, he does all these things. That's why he's the most powerful character, right? If you are like a lone wolf, like I'm going to go off and do my own thing in this world, typically it doesn't look as good, right? So this is sort of what we'll be doing here. I have a character that we could do together, although we could pick a different one. Did I pick this to be purposely controversial? Yes, I did. So y'all, Attack on Titan? Yeah, we're getting there. Yeah, okay. Wow, not a lot of enthusiasm. We could also do a different one, but yeah. So you all seen enough Attack on Titan to do this, right? So who wants to describe to me Eren Yeager from Attack on Titan? Hero question mark. That's a great start. Go for it.
Kid who was incredibly traumatized and never really able to get over it, and basically that trauma just continues.
Yeah, right. Lots of trauma. Sometimes you watch your parents question mark get eaten by a giant monster. Your town gets destroyed. All your friends are dead. That's rough. Yeah.
I would struggle to say heroic, but he's
very driven. Like that. We're not going to say heroism, but we are going to say very driven, motivated, some might say. Yeah, go for it. Xenophobic. Ooh, I love it. Why is he xenophobic? Well, look. Why does that mean that? Oh, wait. Everybody else in the world is different from. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. So we're killing people that are different. That's not great. Would not recommend. 0 of 10. Don't do genocide. Yeah.
An unusual one because he actually does earn his place in a place of privilege. Like he starts to feel low off and actually, does even before he becomes, what he ends up being.
What he ends up being, which if you haven't finished it yet, oh my. Yeah. Manipulative. Yeah. So that's interesting, right? Because he starts off in this like lower position relatively on the totem pole. He rises to be this like maybe heroic figure, but like certainly a powerful one. And there's some weirdness in that, right? And he's manipulative because he manipulates all the people that are close to him. So you start as him being this protagonist, and he has the power of friendship, and they, you know, live through all these horrible things together. And then you start to see him take a really sharp left turn where he is very clearly forcing people into positions that he can take advantage of, which, you know, some people would make the argument that isn't a particularly heroic trait, depending on what you do with it. Anybody else want to add some detail to this? Back here. Yeah.
He's selfless.
He's selfless. Say more about that.
Because he put his friend, like, it's him against the world and his friend, right? And
Yes.
rather risk the world, save his friend. So, I mean, that's technically selfless.
Yeah, I think some people would make a very specific argument that that would be very selfless. Some people would make a specific argument the other direction that that could be portrayed as genocidal. But, you know,
Why? It doesn't matter, though.
yeah, no, it's a complicated situation. Details.
You know them first, so you know, like, it's only fair, you know.
Yeah, you look.
Smash genocide.
They attacked us first.
Yeah, right. You know, it's only self-defense.
Hate that, but yeah, okay.
He very much internalizes everything.
Yeah.
He uses to work, communicate, or
Mm-hmm.
you know, share in order to adapt.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe a really good point that will help us a little bit later here, right? Because if he strongly internalizes everything, like everything is his fault, everything is his to fix, all the problems, all the interdynamic problems and issues that come up with, yeah, that could create an issue, right? Okay, so I feel like we got mostly good information. We're all kind of there. So how do you understand the information that we just talked about? Like, what does that mean? How do you view it, maybe?
I believe he's a product of his environment.
Sure. Why is he a product of that specific environment?
Well, because his main thing was that he hated Titans because of what happened to him. So
Yeah, which fair enough.
that he experienced from his child. That painted his worldview of everything.
Absolutely, right? So he has this perspective that like being in this society, in this world, has molded his worldview by necessity, right? And the trauma, the pain that happens in that changes a person. Absolutely.
I thought it actually just occurred to me building off that is that and the concept of internalizing is that he literally internally is also a Titan.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah, right. And yeah, see that this is why this is useful, right? Because yeah, internally he is the thing that caused him trauma, sort of. Like depending on how systemically you want to look at the trauma, right? Like you could go back far enough and it's something different. But yeah, he is the thing that harmed himself. He is the thing that has caused pain and suffering to all of these people. And that has to do a thing to a person, right? That has to create some problems. Because there are some people who would just be like, great, now I'm the power in this situation. I'll just kill the right people, which would not recommend. Again, please don't go kill people. But yeah, it also, for some people, like you have to split yourself in such a way psychologically to deal with that. Because if you psychologically can embrace that in a way that is comfortable, you probably have a bigger problem than superpowers and eating people and, you know, whatever else that goes into it. Although also a significant problem, I would argue. Yeah.
I think it's important to note that, like, kind of going off everybody else, as a result of his trauma, he never goes through a grief journey, which
Sure.
can, which definitely has like prevented him from like keeping that selfless like attitude, and I think it definitely allowed him to like lean into like the abuse of power more, because if you
Sure.
pick up your grief journey and you did kind of like take the time to really understand like what happened, and even not even lying, but like really understanding, find closure, he probably would have found a much better and a much more humane way of fixing the problems at hand rather than taking this very dark path.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great point, because if you're watching your friends and family die just boom, 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 without any rest or respite, that's going to mess anybody up. There are people that get permanently destroyed psychologically forever by one person that's important to them dying, which fair play. That's how it is. That's how it is. But watching all of your people die and going through all this stuff and never quite getting the chance to do something with that is a major detriment. And it creates what we would call, in a psychological sense, like complicated grief, right? Because if you just have normal garden variety grief, where you just like, you feel sad about stuff and you do weird things and then you get over it, great. Complicated grief is like if it's interrupted or if it's compounded by trauma or delayed or create all these weird things, it will show up eventually, and it will show up in a really bad way. The other thing I would add to this from a psychological perspective is that a lot of people who are traumatized or go through grief really want control over situations. And if you have the like godlike powers to control the circumstances in a very specific way that is not good, but is useful, you might come to that conclusion. Again, no endorsing, but boy needs a hug. Well, then that goes to our third point. What do? Hugs?
Get everybody together.
Yeah.
Big group hug.
Big group hug, power of friendship. Love it. I grew up in that era of anime. Get some Care Bears, love it. The little, yeah, let's do it. Say again?
A lot of it goes back, and I think the show talks about this a bit, but it's societal stuff where throughout the millennia, it's always been the two factions killing each other.
Yep.
One side kills another. It's this whole bloody history of people serializing, conquesting each other, killing each other, and it's created this whole mentality of them. So this whole idea that this racial superiority system, this whole xenophobia, a lot of it is this societal problem that persists and has affected Aaron, and especially with them being on the island, they were isolated from the whole history until season revealed that, it was set there.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because there's a cycle of sort of societal strife and hatred that goes into this that really, honestly, Aaron isn't in charge of and doesn't have any power or control over, right? He can believe that he can, and if I just like basically kill everybody else, there won't be any problems, which on some level is correct, because like if you kill enough people, no problem. But yeah, again, no, don't do genocide. But like, I feel like it's like I'm saying that a lot in this, and that maybe is a concerning point. But well, look, I'm just trying to tell the important lessons to the people, okay? But yeah, maybe there is a societal grander problem that needs to be addressed here. And harming people that harm you is not the answer, clearly, right? Because if you could harm the other people enough to solve the problem, it would have already worked, right? So clearly there's something else. And I think that's a good point, is that like, no matter what Aaron in this situation does, he is still bound by this cycle. Even if he perceives to break the cycle with his own power, you don't, right? You just kick that can further down the road, where there'll be now be a whole nother generation of people who will grow up in the shadow of this horrific event, who will then also have complicated things. Maybe they'll be better than the rest of us and they'll just forgive and move past it, but like, probably not though, right? Historically speaking, I can safely tell you that's not really how it works. But that's a great point. Any other pieces people want to put up here of like, what do you want to see? What do you want to do? Or shall we move on to the freestyle version of this? Okay, well, hope maybe we're going to move past the genocide part of this, but maybe we won't. Depends on what's up with you, So here's the thing. Oh no, only half of the, no, why? Okay, there we go. So I have stashed some extras here if you all totally blank on what you want to talk about. These are just ones that I know have that likelihood to get a little spicy, and so feel free. But anybody character you want to talk about, go for it. Say again? David in Cyberpunk. That's a good one. So I've seen a little bit of Cyberpunk, so you are going to have to fill us in. So what happens to this character? What's he about? What does he do?
How much spoilers am I allowed to say?
I mean, look, friends, like, it's an anime convention. Like, spoil what you're going to spoil, friend. I would like not, maybe like pull a punch at the end. Like, don't tell him the actual end of the anime, but.
David is from a poor, lower income family who single parent is trying to support them through
into a higher education school, really prestigious
Mhm.
institution. He does not fit in. He's bullied because he's not rich or not part of the upper or prestigious class.
Sure.
And he's constantly struggling to relate to his peers because he lives in a society that constantly shits on anyone who's not rich.
Yep.
So far as to completely ignore people who are dying on the street because they don't have enough money to cover insurance.
I wonder what
the
society that's
entire-
based off of.
The entire society and theme of Cyberpunk is corporate dystopia, techno dystopia.
Yep.
Complete utter nightmare of corporate overlords with technology.
So America.
It should not surprise you that the cyberpunk mythos was created by a black man in America. Just so you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. It shouldn't be surprising.
One thing is, it is diverse in a lot of senses,
Sure.
but he, after some events, he ends up dropping out of school and joining a gang of cyberpunks and running along and just basically juicing up with tech and modifying his body to get better to survive these violent assaults, violent mercenary work.
Sure.
Throughout the entire story, he's constantly losing people back to back and just getting numb to killing hordes of goons.
Yep. That's a pretty good estimation summary of this. Anything anyone else want to add to that character? Or shall we move on to our second point here? Okay, so that's our character background, right? If you have not seen the series, you now know enough about this character to talk about something, right? So how do you understand that information? And I'll let, if we get like strike out, we'll get back here. But how do you understand some of what was just said here? Go for it.
I have seen Edge Runner, so like
There you
I'm
go.
familiar with it, but the case of David, a lot of it is wants to rise up, more prominent as a gang leader. He wants to have power. He kind of wants that prestige because he saw what being on the bottom done to him. So
Sure.
Starts developing a relationship with Lucy. He goes ahead and becomes the new leader when events happen. Spoil too much.
I love when people say things like, and then events happen. It's like, that's in the story. That's in the show.
There's one other very important aspect of it.
Yes.
In the society, people are basically modified right after they're born. They are at least 50% robot, metal.
Sure.
And there is a condition in this universe where metal and flesh do not match that well. If you go overboard, your mind starts to shut down and the technology starts to take over. You start going into psychosis. The technology basically gives you superpowers, super speed, super strength, endurance, charisma, foresight, whatever. But it's like a drug, and you have to take a lot of drugs, a lot of nerve killers, in order to survive this kind of transformation.
Yeah, well, and I would say that based on that information, you kind of get into some really obvious and slightly uncomfortable parallels, right? Like, in order to survive in this society, you have to acquire more power and give away human parts of yourself. And you have to take all these drugs to deaden the pain of doing that or to make it possible, right? Don't want to be this guy, but like one of the things we know psychologically is like people that are from complicated backgrounds that experience trauma or from a low SES background or people that are bullied or things like that use drugs at a higher rate. The amount of trauma versus the amount of drug usage is like if you have like 5 traumas happen to you or 8 traumas happen to you on a certain scale, you could be like 12,000% more likely to abuse intravenous drugs. And in this, it's like, okay, just use this drug and then like become a, superpowered god person kind of, except is that going the place you want it to go, right?
Well, I'm not familiar with Cyberpunk Edge Runners, but I'm familiar with Cyberpunk through Shadowrun.
Yep.
And I kind of get the vibe that it's the same deal where why would he value, you're saying he ends up just killing people, not really caring about it, and slowly taking away more of his own humanity. But I think it's the thing of like, if the society doesn't value humanity, where would he learn to value his own humanity?
Yeah, that's a great question.
One of the things is his mother's trying to teach him to value himself. I'm not going to go into that because watch a show.
Fair enough.
The other part of it is people are constantly dying and going psychotic because of this, where he watches it happen.
Yeah.
And yet he thinks he's different. That he's literally built different.
Yeah, well, and that's an interesting point because psychologically, young people have that all the time. There's like, you can watch someone die of the thing you are exactly about to do and be like, well, that wouldn't happen to me. I'm invincible or I'm special in some way, which like sometimes if you're an anime protagonist, you actually are special and then like nothing happens. But like in reality, the large thing of like, if you do dangerous things, bad things will happen to you eventually in a statistical sense, right? Yeah.
So I will admit, I'm not aware of cyberpunk or anything, but kind of hearing what you say. It's, and like also knowing that it was created by a man of color in America, I think it's important. But correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like this guy is like, he is so out of control in his own life, being that, starting with his mom being like, you're gonna go to this school, you're gonna do something like that, you're gonna succeed. It almost seems like a Miles Morales situation where it's like all these expectations of him, but are like piling on. But instead of like Miles, where he's like taking it on and kind of doing something, he breaks under the pressure and feels like he needs to gain control through these like kind of bad acts as a way to kind of not rebel, but find his own path.
So I can see where you get that, but it's not with his mother, it's with the entire society
Sure.
in general. And the whole show is about being a rebel against a system that really doesn't care that you exist. You're a resource.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think it's something that you see in multiple, cyberpunk has it, but give someone you assimilate or not, but even when you attempt to assimilate, because you weren't there first, you're never going to be. Like you see that a lot. I mean, especially you look at some Middle Eastern history when it comes to various tribal issues, the Catholic Protestant wars.
Yeah.
And if you were not born in, it doesn't matter if you've been assimilated with, you're still the most likely to die first. And what that did to people and how quickly people turned on each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say that I think that's by nature a very human thing. Not that it's good, but it's a very human thing, right? Like I was in undergrad, I did pre-1700 European history. And like one of the things that happened in Spain was like a bunch of people kicked down the doors of Jewish folks, threw water on them and said like, oh, you're Christian, now bye. And then just like left. And they're like, cool, well, now that you're Christian, there's gonna be no problems, right? And then like 10, 15 years later, they all started thinking like, hey, wait a second. What if when we splashed the water on their heads, they didn't actually mean it? What if they're secretly still against us? And I was like, secretly? Like, you kicked in their door and splashed water on them, bro. Like, what did you think was going to happen? But yeah, right. If you are the most recent person, sometimes that goes badly for you anyway, even if you do convert and even if you do assimilate. Also, sometimes like the people that do assimilate become the most fervent, true believers that then persecute other people. And so then you're like, well, if I'm going to be in, I'm going to be all in. And then you turn around and you start doing horrific things to the people that are like you, right? Which kind of gets into this weird thing of like, how do you stay human in this situation? How do you cultivate a human relationship when I'd said maybe there isn't a lot of humanity to go around, or at least not the same level of humanity that you or I are dealing with. Okay, so I feel like we've got some good, like, how do we interpret this? So what do you do in this situation? Like, group hugs. Again, hugs almost always work. Therapy is also a very valid one that you can always say, and it always works. Sort of. Hey.
They have the wrong.
More drugs or less drugs, depending on how you view it.
Maybe got for their down, up when they need down or something.
Yeah, it's complicated. It's like a
He's trying to get to the dopamine. We gotta settle down a little bit.
look, man, dopamine cleanse. Yeah.
So, well, first step, just talk.
Just talk. Yeah, well, look,
Yeah.
look. There's a lot of problems in a lot of shows and a lot of anime specifically, where it's just like if you just like sit down and have like an adult human conversation with somebody about something, like turns out a lot of those problems go away.
But one of the things is in cyberpsychosis, nobody else knows what's going on. You're seeing things in your head.
Yeah,
It's becoming
absolutely.
artificial. And just talking will solve like 80% of problems. There's
Absolutely.
A lot of, like macho masculine things. You gotta be top dog, stoic.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, and that's an interesting point then. Like, what are the trends of these things? What values are instilled in you? Like, if you are told that masculinity looks like this, and this is the only way to perceive it or to perpetrate it, then you have to do that, right? Or else you don't fit in, which fair enough, but like masculinity of that sort is a prison, right? You can't do anything outside of it, or else you suddenly aren't masculine anymore. And then, you know, if masculinity is like doping yourself up with drugs and giving yourself arm blades and killing people, like doing anything other than that is kind of a rough time, right? Right. Oh.
Oh, thank you. I think what would be really interesting to do is with Dave, have him look into other ways to express his disdain for the environment around him.
Sure.
Like, I mean, activism exists for a reason. I mean, the writer's strike even right now, I'm keeping up with it.
Yep.
The reason it's happening right now is because people are not happy with the way they're being paid and treated. I'm not saying a protest is going to change the dystopian like environment that he's in, but having this knowledge of like what this underground city is like and knowing the hurt that psychosis can go through, he can. I think it'd be important to teach him like, here's how to be an activist in your own life. And now that you know what these signs are, you can help one person that's down there. Maybe find them something.
Yep.
Like maybe not give them insurance if they can't pay for it, but maybe like, hey, there's something here for you. It's cheap. It's easy. Let's get you there, and maybe start, and that maybe be able to help him as well, like undoing all this knowing here.
Absolutely. I mean, I will say, I don't know that it works in every dystopia, but like generally speaking, if like all of the people stop tolerating certain things, or at least a majority of the people with access to certain kinds of resources stop tolerating certain things, those things stop happening, or things happen and then different things start happening. Look, sometimes you do a revolution and there's a guillotine, and then they start guillotining the people that did the revolution, and but look, I'm just saying, if enough people stop tolerating a societal thing, it will change or the society will collapse. I'm not necessarily here to endorse either of those things necessarily, but you know. But look, viva la revolution, right? Yeah.
You talked about a lot what I was going to say, essentially from cyberpunk, like many other dystopian futures. It's not very subtle about its whole like class relations. People who are very wealthier in the top, then in the slums below you have people who can't afford it. It's just pretty standard cyberpunk thing. But yeah, it's a lot of it is just if David, was not in the situation, if his mom was able to get health care and not didn't need the platinum plan or whatever, they called into the show, get the EMS like, oh hey, you don't have the platinum plan, you're just gonna die here. So like just walk by. I think he couldn't even afford a burial because like oh, you just have the cremator, you can't even bury her. And then like I think he had to like leave his apartment eventually because so like if he didn't have to constantly worry about his own existence, and like if his parents were like, okay, I don't have to worry about living, I don't have to worry about this, but that's just kind of how cyberpunk is, showing like how dystopian and crap things can get.
Absolutely, and I will say there's a reason that most of the popular dystopias are not subtle dystopias. Because like a really subtle dystopia would be like kind of psychologically uncomfortable to read about, I would think. Which
probably would just be regular fiction.
Yeah, it would probably just be
that is a subtle
normal stuff. Yeah. But that's a great point, right? Like, what if you don't have to worry about the cost of survival? What if you just have some of the resources you need? Like, that would change a life, right? And we know that from real life as well, right?
How you get the Renaissance.
Yeah, that's how you get a lot of things that have happened in human history. Like, oh yeah, what if this didn't happen? Oh yeah. All right, so let's do one more and on a little bit more of a truncated timeline. What do you think?
Greed from Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood.
Oh,
Ooh.
okay.
Or
Well, I know,
anyone from
I
Fullmetal
love it.
Alchemist
I know
Brotherhood,
this,
like
but
Greed.
what do we see here?
So we have a homunculus made from a piece of father that father literally rejected from himself, whose original motivation was because he was supposed to be the pure essence of greed, wanted everything in the world, no category limited to it, went too far out of control according to father that he was reabsorbed and later put into another person.
As you do.
Supposedly without those memories, except he eventually got them back.
That sounds complicated.
Yeah. And somehow or another ended up having his goals align with the main protagonist to go help stop father, who was a bastard in every sense of the word.
Yeah, so like your maybe sort of godlike father figure, who is literally called father, if you need something more Freudian than that, I don't know, creates you and then uncreates you and then recreates you, which bit of an issue, let's say. There's some birth, unbirth, rebirth trauma going on there, which I don't even want to touch with a 10-foot pole, but we're going to get there probably. Yeah, it helps the protagonist, right? The protagonist, at least at some point in the main series, the whole point is like, we're going to take down all of you and your siblings and your father, right? So then you get this whole like, okay, now you're going to have to go kill your family, or at least contribute to that, which, like, again, if your siblings are, you know, personifications of like the other 7 deadly sins, maybe that kind of creates complicated feelings. I don't know how you resolve that.
None of his siblings really like himself, and before he even figures out what he actually wants out of the world, there's also the part where he kind of sacrificed all his minions on the basis of, I can get more.
Yeah, which is a pretty casual disregard for life in a lot of ways, which is a bit rich for someone who's had at least more than one of them. Yeah, it's a little upsetting, right? What other things happen in this series that we haven't covered so far? Yeah.
Well, to kind of jump off, he bonds with a prince of another nation who he himself is very greedy, but for very different reasons.
Sure.
And so they end up working together as kind of this duo within a body. Yeah. And
You know, when you work together and the other person lives inside of you.
Yeah. And as a result, they end up becoming very, very close. And very much form this very much like very much platonic soulmate kind of thing, where they like if they existed after together, they probably would have like continued to be friends throughout the line.
Nope.
But he ends up later on sacrificing himself for the friends that he made along the way, including the friends, because at the end of the day, after figuring out everything, he realized all he wanted was a friend, someone to listen to, someone to like want the things that he wanted, and not like and support him in his stuff.
Sure, which for a being created out of weird circumstances and all this is like a very human thing to arrive at, sort of, right? Like the most human thing is like you open the treasure chest at the end and it turns out that the treasure was the friends you made along the way, right? Or the
traumatized by the friends he threw away along the way.
Right, which is also a very human thing, by the way. Or, you know, if you're of a certain type, since it's pride, like it turns out that the treasure at the end was like the gay you became along the way, which also great, 10 out of 10. But yeah, that's a really interesting thing, right? Because then you get into this whole like, okay, he is his own person, but he like is cohabitating in a body, soul, question mark, depending on how you look at it, with a person, and sort of learning in some ways how to become human, or at least the humanity of other people kind of rubbing off a little bit. But then also being put in a situation where like you could sacrifice yourself, and knowing that like this same person previously was like, no, you all die for me, bye. And then just, you know.
Right. He also works as a pretty good foil for father, who started out as
Sure.
a homunculus who was with people, and rather than embracing or learning about, or in his effort to become more human or the perfect human, basically took a hard left turn and went the absolute wrong way. Whereas the son that father hated the most is the one who actually succeeded at the goal.
Yeah, when I think that's a really interesting parallel to draw, right? Because like relationships between parents and children can be like that, where it's like, oh, you had this goal and clearly we're trying to achieve it through children, which like don't do, by the way. Like you're like, I wasn't good at football, so my son is going to be the best at football, is a really great way to set up a bad situation for your whole family. But yeah, right, like being almost opposite of each other, or reflections, right, of like your father took a completely different turn and like became the most human in a way that involved like killing all of them, or at least controlling them, or whatever you want to.
We're going to purge all my emotions and then commit a genocide.
Look, and again, I can't stress this enough. Don't do genocide. It's bad. It's like always wrong, just so you know. We got there eventually.
You were mentioning that like you become soulmates with the prince.
Yep.
Is that he could throw away his minions because they were just friends. You can make more friends. He can't get another soulmate. So like it's the one thing he can't greed. He can't let someone take something they can't get back.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting way of framing it, right? Because like in a way, like, yeah, you can always get more minions. That's the great part about minions. There's always more of them. Again, don't kill people. But if you are greed, right? If you are the personification of possessing things and that jealous sort of avarice of it, you can't give away the one thing that is truly yours, right? And that might motivate you to do very different things that would be perceived as anti your existence, right? Because if like you're supposed to be this like horrifically greedy, whatever, you might react in unexpected ways, but also you might start change how you think of that, right?
I think another part that could have helped driven that is where before he had the minions who did the fighting for him.
Yes.
He has to give up control to Ling, who is the better fighter sometimes, to defend their physical body.
Yeah, right. And that's an important experience. Sometimes you have to give up control. And this is kind of getting us to our second point here of like how you understand that. But like, yeah, if you are forced to take your hands off the wheel and just let things happen, that creates a lot of psychological pain for a lot of people. But also it can cultivate this sort of sense of like, oh, I was never actually in control, right? There's a healthy way to exist where you like don't white knuckle the wheel the entire time, where you just kind of like, oh, all right, like I should still drive, but sometimes other people drive. Sometimes you do different things in life, right? Yeah.
I think going on your point about the control, it's like going off in a very different universe, but like in real life, you can't control what's going on. Like you only have control of your own actions and trying to be in charge, control everything. Life is unstable. There's a lot of variables. There's a lot of interdependent interconnections that you can't possibly predict. So when you try to control that all, you're going to go bad because you're trying to micromanage everything, and these things can't be micromanaged. So you have to, as you mentioned, like move the wheel sometimes. Let someone else drive. You have to be flexible, or else you're going to get blown away. Like a tree, I guess. You got to bend with the wind.
Absolutely. And I think there's a great point in that for a lot of people, control is an illusion. The idea that you can control anything is incorrect. You can control yourself some of the time, but at best, you will have control over 50% of a conversation with somebody. At best, right? You will have control over some of the things that happen to you. It's important to have the psychological flexibility to bend and not break in the face of the fact that, like, hey, stuff's going to happen to you that even if you're great, you're not going to be able to do anything about it.
Okay, so I don't know if it's different in the sub, but there is a line that greed does say where it's like, greed isn't about money, is it all about money and power? Everyone wants something that they don't have, specifically head. And I think that's a really interesting point, because I think that really shows us, like, even then he's starting to like show his humanity, when in the beginning, like, he was very like straight edge, like he knew what he wanted, he knew everything. And then as we begin to understand him more as a character, especially as not only does he get to know Lane, but also Ed, Al, and everyone there, like their influence on him makes him realize that these small little unimportant things like minions, good outfits, like that's not what he wants. Like what he wants is people, like not just people under him, but people who be equal to him. Everybody wants something that they don't have. And I think more than anything, he's saying that to himself. Because in that situation, it's like he has everything he wants, but he's gonna lose it.
Yeah, which is a very human thing, right? To be like, I now have things that I don't want to lose. Uh-oh. Wait, that's weird. Yeah.
Now, wasn't that also from the argument where Reed was trying to make the point that all of these sins are not necessarily 100% bad?
Yeah. I mean, I would make the argument that there are acceptable ways to express a desire for things and greed and possessiveness, right? They aren't exclusively all bad. Lust or gluttony or any of those things aren't exclusively bad. There's a line, right? And also, of course, they kind of like, in some ways, come out of that like sort of Judeo-Christian technique of like, these things are bad because some people a while ago said they were bad. Again, some of the things are self-evident, don't do them, but some of them are also just like a bunch of guys got together and said, don't do this, which now we've just taught a bunch of people not to do it, which again, I don't necessarily disagree with the moral judgment always, but yeah. So then let's take a minute or two here. Like, what do you do with this? So we know what happens to this character in this way, but like, what do you want to see done? Or how would you handle this for somebody who was not a soul shard homunculus who may or may not continue to exist or rebirth?
Give him another friend who won't put up with any of his bullshit?
Yeah, right? It's important to have relationships and strong relationships that can ground you, right? Because if you're like always pushing and the other person's like, no, like that helps. Believe it or not, just that connection with people helps too, to kind of temper things, because there's a lot of things you can think and do in your own head that like start to look a lot less cool when you start to interact with other people and you're like, oh wait, but what? That actually sounds horrifying. That's a good one. Power of friendship, right? Always. Yeah, maybe you talk about your daddy issues there, friend. Yeah, look, there's some real deep Freudian that you could get into with this, where it's like, look, sometimes people feel very differently or strongly about their parents, and you know, that's a whole thing. Yeah, there's some daddy issues to work through there, right? And in a therapeutic sense, sometimes you can't reconcile with the people who caused you this kind of thing, but you can kind of create your own acceptance with that, and maybe there is an acceptance that you can arrive at that would be more psychologically healthy, where you can know where you came from and all the bad things that happened to you, and also find a way to do something different with your life. Yeah.
Probably why there's no psychologists in these realms, because if there were, everything would be like 5 episodes.
Yeah, no, exactly. And this is the point I make. One of the examples I usually use is Sasuke from Naruto, and it's a good one, but I was like, Naruto's, whatever. And also there's like new Sasuke, and so I'm not like ready to go in on that yet. But yeah, like in Naruto, bless you, in Naruto there's like medical ninjas, but not therapy ninjas. You know what I mean? So it's like, where's the therapy ninja? Like, does he have a couch that just like he jutsus out of nowhere? And he's like, tell me about that, Yeah, like, look, I don't want to be this guy. Like, they've got the waterfall and the presentation that he did that was like really wonderful. Right, I'm just saying, like, here's the thing. You can do it. It's possible, right? Look, they got jutsus for every other damn thing. Yeah, but that's sort of a thing, right? There isn't a lot of that here, and I don't know that that's always like by intentional design of like we're avoiding the possibility that you might like talk to somebody in a therapy, but that's the thing, is like for a lot of people the reality is that those things don't exist in their communities, they don't exist in their worlds, or they are incredibly hard to access in a way that like healthcare is hard to access, right? That's why all through my training in psychology, the thing has been, it should be part of a universal healthcare system, and it should be free, right? I still want to get paid my money for sure, but like if you're going to charge $200 an hour to heal someone's brain, the only people that can afford to get healing are going to look a certain way, or going to act a certain way. Again, things have value, and I'm not necessarily 100% anti-capitalist in this particular way, but if you have all the fancy shiny machines and only the rich people can afford to use them, then what is the point of having the fancy shiny machines, right? It's to help rich people.
I don't know, but there's a whole isekai idea. I'm the only psychologist in a fantasy world.
Damn, that's so good.
Oh my God. I paid so much money to watch that. I don't have enough psychology to write it though. I don't care.
That's why you work in teams.
If you want to, though, we can make this happen because I do. Okay, well, look, everybody exchange contact information. We'll write it. We'll publish it. Look, everybody get everybody's contact information. We're gonna do this.
Can you imagine, like, he's like drawn out battles, and all of a sudden, the main character walks in and says, "Hey."
Hey.
We're gonna try to sit down and talk about barbarians' range issues.
I love it. I'm 100% on this.
Entire plot lines every episode.
Yeah. And the thing is, I think we're in a world in where anime and manga are right now, where like the anti-joke would be so funny that it would just circle about to be funny again every time.
Yeah, you could take like like parodies of every battle anime. Every
How
episode.
funny though would it be to just watch the guy like talk down and talk through the mommy issues of the BBEG?
Look,
And
I'm in it. I'm in it.
And the power of it would be that because he's able to do this, by just saying, "Hey, let's talk about this," would just come over them that they need to do that.
Yeah, don't commit genocide. Look.
It's possible to not commit genocide.
Look.
Evil demon is like, really?
Actually, that sounds lovely. Yeah.
Every episode begins with a big shonen battle right behind you at his office, and he just goes.
Same thing, different day. Yeah. I love this. I'm on board. Let's do it. All right. So that's sort of my time mostly here. So I've got stuff up here. I've also got a card that has QR stuff on here. If you need to find ways to get in touch with me, and we're all exchanging contact information to write our new series, which sounds great to me. I've also got a few physical business cards left. They also have the same QR code. So if you want to get in touch with me, you have ways to do that. Otherwise, thank you all for being here and being such good sports, and go out and do this. Damn, and the title can be like one of those long, like terrible, in my perspective, isekai titles that are like, I'm the only one in the thing that's a psychology, and I'm gonna learn how to, 100%. 100%. Look.
I'm sorry, we need to give the hero some therapy because the chosen one always gets stolen away when they're like 10.
Look, that's so
Thrown
true.
onto the battle.
That's so true.
I think this is the last one.
That's all right. Sometimes you run out, but there is a digital version that you can scan. You can also tap your phone to it, and it'll get it to you as well.
So question, have you ever seen End of the World?
Which one?
From End of the World?
A little bit. I haven't seen the whole thing.
I recommend watching it through because, like, with the character analysis, I want to say one of the characters, but I didn't want to say it out loud because it spoiled the entire show. And
oh yeah, there's a few series that I think are really cool to talk about, and they're like that, where it's just like if I say anything out loud, it becomes weird, right? Yeah.
So WTG signed it on YouTube?
Yeah, it might have changed. If you're looking for it, you can just tap phone, or you can scan the QR code on the back. It has all the ways to email me. It has YouTube. It has all that good stuff. So you can find me wherever.
Okay. Thank you for the lecture.
Well, the fun part about doing these kind of things, I sit in here and I listen to things or people talk to me and I'm like, oh, damn, that's a great idea. Like the other one I had earlier today, I was sitting in the bullying panel and I was like, anime character therapy. That would be funny, right? Like someone's dressed as Sasuke laying down on a chase lounge and you're just like, tell me about your feelings. Like, I think that would be funny. I don't know if anyone else thinks that would be funny that you would go to. Right, that's the thing, is you have to like cycle through it.
A long-lasting series.
Yeah, look, I'm not here. You can tap against it, it'll bring up a prompt, or you can scan the QR code on the back. Either way works for you.
I'm right down. It really would just become that scene in Across the Spider-Verse where it's just like,
You can bump up.